So the relevance of organizational learning today, there are a couple of ways to think about this. First, there was a time when Seoul was created. At that time, it was quite evident that who was leading transformation in the world, who had the greatest impact on change, were actually large companies. It was no longer the church. It was no longer, the other governance that were going on. That it seems a lot of that had been bogged down, and organizations were actually the ones that were changing and adapting fairly quickly, or who wanted to. So there was a lot of research about that happening, and what began to be evident was that there was something else going on, something at a much larger level in the world. And Alain de Vulpian does mention this in his research over the past decades, that the ordinary people of the world are now, things are happening for people all over the world within that are actually having them operate almost independently and autonomously. They don't wait for the organization to do this for them. They're actually rising up and making movements happen that couldn't have happened before. So, one example of this is when that Ari talks about is when Shell, when the oil companies were so powerful, the rising up of NGOs, that something like Greenpeace could actually stop a large organization in its tracks, because a large group of individuals expressing themselves as something like Greenpeace could actually do that is a fairly new phenomenon. The internet has opened up all kinds of possible ways for people to do their own diagnoses and to demand. There are whole customer demand groups in the medical field, in pharmaceuticals, that has changed the game somewhat. In other words, change is happening faster than large organizations can keep up. Lots of new types of organizations, new animals are showing up. So at a time like this, the methods, the practices, reliable practices, and innovative practices need to be available for organizations that want to keep up, learn at the speed of change. And so more than ever, I think that the things that we've been working on for the last 30 years are now being asked for. Organizational learning is being asked for at a new level. In fact, when Peter and the team that started Fifth Discipline were first speaking about it, they said that it would take 20 or 30 years before it was actually recognized for what it is. And we're now at the place where the need is so evident for businesses because of the rapidly changing business paradigms and events. The people that are stealing the lunch of the large organizations or the smaller groups in the garages. They're not other large organizations. Organizations need to large companies need to find ways in business to keep up, be able to create innovation within large systems, which is not an easy thing to do. So for the traditional organizations we talked about, it's important. For new organizations, there's a lot of cross-sector work happening now that requires that people across mindsets can communicate with one another, can have dialogues that lead to action. And that's also not an easy thing to do across mindsets, such as philanthropies, NGOs, public sector, private sector. There are a lot of social needs that are happening now that require that you be able to speak across those systems. And the only way to do that is to do it systemically, to be able to see them as parts of a system, to see ourselves as parts of a system that we can then become resonant with. If we can't do that, that resonance that's needed is too weak, and we can't do we can't address large intransigent problems that we can't do by ourselves. So now, again, more than ever, organizational learning tools and principles and stories are needed to be able to address those kinds of issues, which are now clearly at hand. One thing that that Irene asked me to mention was how important research is in this aspect. That the ability to actually look at what's happening intentionally and explicitly and learn from it, and then be able to move forward with that learning as part of our next steps, is something that research can help us with. That the ability to actually look at what we're doing, learn how it's working and how it isn't, and be able to apply that in more effective ways is absolutely critical to this time. So organizational learning, more than ever, we need to keep that research component alive and vital and engaged with everything that we do. That particularly in Seoul, France, there are many examples of how the research that Seoul, France was able to do in very large organizations actually helped those organizations reflect on what it was about them that was so important to conserve and to build on. And I believe is one of the reasons Seoul, France is so successful, is that organizations understand the part that reflection, collective reflection, plays in this system. So it's not just the tools, the stories, it's actually the reflection, the active reflection collectively that allows us to build on and accelerate what we are seeing in response to the change as fast as it's changing.